I made the case. I said he was a dangerous man to return to the presidency. He lacks principles. He doesn't have a broad scaling vision for the United States or for the free world. He doesn't want to integrate the world. The world needs, whether we like it or not, the world needs integration with respectability for the individual.
We've got a sense of who Trump is appointing to his cabinet. Tell me the good appointments and the bad appointments. Does Marco Rubio, for example, sensible Secretary of State?
In the context of what America is and how long he's been in the Senate and on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, yes, I think he is. Listen, I mean, we've had a failure. If we're really going to be brutally honest on your show, we've had a failure of policy in America that dates back to 2003. I think the neocon policies, which started the Iraqi war, the Afghanistan invasion, was understandable given what happened on 9/11, but the spillover into the Iraqi war, I think people have to look back now with 20 years of hindsight and say that that was a failure. Staying in Afghanistan as long as we did probably was also a failure, but that's a neocon strategy. Marco Rubio is a neocon. He's a descendant of the George Bush, Dick Cheney, Jeb Bush sort of school of thinking. And so I would say that Mike Walsh, the National Security Advisor, is also in that camp. It's interesting because people like Pete Hegseth are in the other camp.
He's the nominee for the Department of Defense.
Correct. He's in the other camp because he fought in those wars, and I think he saw like the senselessness of those wars. J.D. Vance is in that camp. I sort of feel like if you're closing in on 50. You're still a neocon. If you're still in your 40s and you fought 20 years ago for the American government in Iraq, you are not a neocon. So Trump has a mixed bag of people that he's putting into place. But yes, Marco Rubio is going to be confirmed. He's a fellow brethren in the Senate. It would be unusual for the Senate not to confirm one of their own people who's going on to a position like that. Will he do a good job in that position? I actually think he will. I think he's a savvy person. He's articulate. But again, what is the American policy going forward? I think that's what people have to be asking themselves. And is it this muscular neocon policy? Is it the Trumpian policy where they're going to withdraw from the world and become this proto-isolationist state? What directionally, where are we going? And I think that's Trump. There's an ambivalence to Trump. He's the classic Gemini from the astrology. He's got two twins in there. He's born on June 14th, and he's got two twins in there. And there's a bad twin, and there's a medium bad twin. There's no good twin in there. They're both bad, and so he's ambivalent, and he goes back and forth between a lot of different ideas and policies, and it's hard to figure out what he wants to do.
How interesting. I'm a Gemini as well. Suddenly I understand my kind of affinity with
look at that.
with Donald Trump.
Maybe you have two good people in there trapped inside that body of yours, Ed. But Trump, he talks out of both sides of his mouth. He gets away with it, and he sends out a lot of confusing signals. He's meeting with Zelensky, and obviously he wants to charm him. And I'm sure he sent him some signals that are very different than the ones that he's thinking about when he's going to interact with Vladimir Putin. So it's hard to nail him down. I think what's made him a success as a politician, it's almost like a box of candy. There's something in the box for everybody. If you choose to like him, there's things he said that you can cling to. Of course, if you choose to dislike him, there's plenty of those things too. So we'll have to see what happens with him. But listen, I made the case. I said he was a dangerous man to return to the presidency. He lacks principles. He doesn't have a broad scaling vision for the United States or for the free world. He doesn't want to integrate the world. The world needs, whether we like it or not, the world needs integration with respectability for the individual.
I hadn't intended to start off on foreign affairs, but actually it's a really useful way to kick off because obviously we're in London. We're concerned about the impact on the UK and indeed on Europe of US foreign policy. And I guess there are kind of three areas of conflict where Trump is going to have an enormous influence. One is the Middle East, where one could argue if he gives unequivocal backing to Israel, that might actually hasten peace in the Middle East. One is the relationship with China, which is going to be the big geopolitical question, as it has been now for quite a few years. And the third is, as you mentioned briefly, peace in inverted commas in Ukraine, which could have a major impact on Europe. I mean, I guess for us, the existential question is, will America have our backs? And that's where there's some ambiguity, I guess.
Well, if you're Marco Rubio, he's going to tell you that he has your back. If you're Mike Walsh, he's going to tell you that he has your back. If you're Donald Trump, depends on which side of the bed he's waking up on. But I mean, again, that's the problem. You don't. We've done some things to hurt ourselves. I mean, the self-inflicted wounds of not having a vision, not having a policy, not understanding that it's important to integrate with our allies that think the way we do. You've enjoyed great freedom in the United Kingdom. I've enjoyed great freedom here in the United States. We need each other to maintain that freedom. There's 5.7 billion people that are living under some form of tyranny and autocracy around the world, and it's important for the free world to join forces to protect each other. Donald Trump, some days he understands that. Other days he talks about full-scale isolationism, and he talks about the need to retrench America. That would be very bad for Europe. The Europeans have better memories. That last time I was in studio with you, I said to you, the Europeans understand the scourge of violent fascism. They've toured the areas of the Blitz or the Church of War Rooms, or they went to Normandy as school children. The Americans don't have that living memory of what happened. When Hitler entered Poland in September of '39, you tell me, was it a year later he was bombing London? I mean, so you got to be very careful, because to really understand what Putin is doing, he's flexing outside of his country to galvanize nationalistic support inside of his country. And so that's what he's doing. And so there's an ancestral thing to it. I know there's a Peter the Great thing to it, all that sort of stuff. But you can't be in those other countries that are bordering Russia and watch what he's doing in the Ukraine and say, geez, I have to be a little worried about this. And so you need a muscular NATO. You need a muscular defense strategy when you're dealing with autocrats. Democracies don't go to war with each other, Ed.
The other aspect of foreign policy, if I can put it this way, is tariffs. Tell us a bit about what you think is going to happen. There's a school of thought, and again, it might be hope over expectation. Trump talks tough on tariffs in order to get a deal, and a lot of this is just rhetoric. What are we likely to see in the first few months of a Trump presidency?
Well, think about how monumental the tough talk is, though. He talks tough on tariffs related to Canada. The Prime Minister of Canada descends on Mar-a-Lago. 1 week later, he loses his deputy prime minister. His government's in disarray, and they're thinking about a possible resignation. So I would tell my friends to the north of me, calm down. Okay, that's Donald Trump. Let's wait and see what the actual proposals are before we go into disarray like that. So my thing is, what I don't like is there's a gentleman by the name of Robert Lighthizer. You may remember his name. He was the former U.S. Trade Representative. He's very close to Trump. He wrote a book, which I recommend to people if they really want to understand Trump's position and Lighthizer's position on global trade. The title of the book is No Trade is Free. And Lighthizer tries to explain in the book that the U.S., in order to help the world after the Second World War and during the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, which ultimately became the World Trade Organization, we unevened the trade system, meaning we made it less favorable to the U.S. We protected nations in Europe and in Asia and said, okay, your markets can be protected. You can tariff us, but we'll let your goods flow freely into the United States. Why did we do that? We did that because we were trying to rebuild these places after the war. We knew there was a scourge of communism out there, and it was very important for us. And then we added the Marshall Plan on top of that. Again, this was all to fortify these democracies and to integrate our allies and to protect everybody. And even though it looked very generous and benevolent on behalf of the Americans, it was actually in our self-interest to do all of these things. And so Trump made the point, okay, the trade system is uneven. We bring in China in the World Trade Organization, 1999, they come in as an emerging country. Ed, go look at the document. So they have all these protections for their market, and they're able to dump stuff into our markets fairly
Mm.
freely to grow their economy, similar to what happened in the 40s with GATT. And it goes unchecked. And so China rises, hurts our industries, hurts your Midlands, hurts your manufacturing areas. And so Trump's point and Lighthouse's point is that we have to correct those
So they've
imbalances.
got a point. They've
They
got a
do.
point.
They do have a point. But the bad point is the overwhelming macro. I'm going to have 500, 600% tariffs. You've got to do X, Y, Z. Otherwise, we're going to do tariffs. If you went to the American people and said, listen, tariffs are a consumption tax. Some countries have a VAT. We're going to put some tariffs on goods that are coming into the country, but it's going to be surgical, and it's going to be done to protect the industries that we need to protect. So as an example, if China teams up with their steel industry, meaning the government is now fortifying and subsidizing the steel industry, and they can dump steel into the American market below the market price to crush
Yeah.
out their American competitors, we can't allow that.
Yeah.
We have to
That's an unfair subsidy.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to put up a surgical tariff and say, you're undermining our markets by not making this market free. You're tipping the scale towards your country's companies. Okay, so that's
So I mean, what I'm getting
I'm
from
all
you,
for those, by the
yeah,
way. I think
yeah,
those
exactly.
are
What I'm getting from you, Anthony, is a kind of quite a balanced take on Trump. I mean,
no, 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 no.
if we
I'm
weren't
giving you
talking
the
about the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of uns, his impetuous behavior, if I can put it that way.
well, I'm giving
But
you the balance take. I'm
yeah,
giving you what the smart people in the room want to do.
yeah,
Okay, and he pushed Lighthizer out,
yeah,
pushed them out. And he said, well, why'd you push Lighthizer out? He's not willing to do the bold things that I'm willing to do. Well, what do you mean by that, Mr. Trump? Well, we're going to be really aggressive. We're going to be super muscular with these tariffs. Well, how are you going to do that, and why are you going to do that? No answer. See, so he's, and then he talks about McKinley, and so he talks about McKinley, and when you talk about McKinley, what does he want to do? He wants to take the Americans back to the 1890s. That would be horrific for the world. When he talks about McKinley, he's sending a signal that he wants to wall America off, literally and physically, from the rest of the world. That was a period in time in our economic history where 97% of what we produced in the country we consumed. You can't do that. If Roosevelt was alive, he would be giving speeches against the Charles Lindbergh isolationists, and he would say, "You can't do that. We have to. You have to think about what Roosevelt did. He knew the country did not want to go to war. He knew he had lots of isolationists and different factions in the country, but he sent the arms to the UK, and he sent the arms to Russia, and then he called it this sort of lend-lease thing, and he said, if my friend's house is on fire, am I not going to lend the garden hose in my backyard to help my friend put the house on out of fire? And so, but he understood the world, he understood the complexity of the world, and he set the framework for the United Nations, which was a derivation of what Woodrow Wilson was doing when Roosevelt was the Undersecretary of the Navy. So Trump has none of this in his personality. He doesn't have a world view that he can articulate. Steve Bannon has a worldview that he can articulate. It's similar to Trump's. But Trump
and
is
Steve Bannon has a worldview that Trump could have a third term.
Well, the Constitution says that he can't. He's doing that to rile up the liberals. He's doing that to scare people. This nonsense going on with Liz Cheney is another saber-rattling device to sort of scare people. And you just have to hope that the judicial system in the United States and the criminal procedure processes in the United States hold. We still have a fairly decent level of impartiality. The court system is still believed in this country to be fair and generally impartial. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but if you're going to go after Liz Cheney for absolutely no reason, I think she gets exonerated. If you're telling me we're going to have show trials and we've got show courts like they do in these totalitarian states, then obviously we're going to have trouble in our country, and it's going to affect your country.
Let's talk a bit about what is already happening, even though Trump is not yet sworn in as the president.
Mm-hmm.
This week, Trump and arguably Elon Musk together
Mm-hmm.
killed a spending bill.
Yeah, big
And there are
mistake.
two things that come from this. One is this kind
Mm-hmm.
of nuanced view of Trump, because some people might say, that old pork barrel politics. I think the spending bill, for example, contained a spending provision for a stadium for the Washington Cardinals. Maybe it's a good thing that you upend the system like that. But also, the interesting thing is, it started with a tweet or it started with an X. Uh, Elon Musk's X led to people bombarding their congressman,
Yeah,
and a
really
bill
bad.
was killed. So, is it going to be a dual presidency? How long will the Musk-Trump relationship last?
Well, I think at something like that, they're in ideological sync, so I don't think that's going to smudge the relationship. If the news starts reporting that Musk is more powerful than Trump, that will hurt the relationship. But I think they're in sync on this. Trump is upset about the pork barrel spending, and for your outside the U.S. audiences, that just means we've got a big omnibus bill going. Each of the congressmen and senators, they put things into the bill that leads to spending in their districts or favors something that's going on in their state, and they call that pork. They add pork to the menu, if you will, of the spending. And so, I think it's a bad practice. I think we've bloated the system. We also, I mean, I think people outside the country don't understand the power of these lobbyists. I mean, I'll just say this to you, and I want you to think about it this way: if we're going to spend $6 trillion, which is 27% of the country's GDP and approximately 7% of the world's GDP. Okay, 6 trillion US dollars. And there's 535 people that control that spending process plus one president. So let's call it 536 people are going to control $6 trillion, Ed. Is there any wonder that there's $20 billion a year spent on lobbying those people? And sending them steaks and giving them champagne and working with them and their people and giving them campaign donations to do the bidding of the people that are lobbying them. And so the answer to that is, of course. And so what's happened is you've got this bloatation of these bills where the spending is reckless. I'll just put it to you this way: we were in somewhat of an equipoise. We were taking in 17% of the GDP and spending 19. We're now taking in 17% of the GDP and spending 27. That is not sustainable. And so, said differently, we went from George Washington through George W. Bush and spent $7 trillion of deficit spending. From Barack Obama into Donald Trump and into Joe Biden, we have spent $28 trillion in the last 20 years. Okay, so everybody's got to sit back and take a look at this. It's completely out of control. So,
Yeah.
however, if you're going to shut down the government, okay, you have a system in place. If Musk wants to do a good job for the American people, get the bill signed. That's what everybody's expecting anyway. You don't want to upset the marketplace. You don't want to upset the entitlement payments. Get the bill signed. Give yourself some time to restructure. You're not going to be able to restructure this thing in the 48 hours before the government gets shut down. And so,
So,
for me, I get it. You're upset about it. A lot of the things that they're saying is true. I certainly don't want the shenanigans that happen in Washington to continue because it's going to really hurt this country. And Ed, let me tell you something. The rich people make out fine. Okay, what happens when you do this sort of stuff?
they
You're
always do.
killing, you're killing the middle class and you're killing the poor. You're just crushing their living standards, and you got to get control of this situation so
Let's
that when people get paid for their labor, they don't lose it in the destruction of inflation.
let's end with the Democrats. You called it for
Yeah.
Kamala, I think.
You got
A
it
lot of
way
people
wrong.
thought.
Oh my
A lot
God,
of people thought
Ed, let me tell you
Kamala.
something. Dominic Sandbrook. Do you know Dominic?
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, he got it so right. Okay, I was sitting there with Alistair and Rory. We were live
Rory,
streaming.
of course, called it. Rory Stewart called
No,
it for
I
Kamala.
think Rory lost money. At least I didn't put a bet. I didn't put a bet down, but we called it wrong. I I don't know. Maybe I was too close to it. Listen. I'm an investor. So what happens when you make a mistake investing? You've got to be dispassionate. You got to see, well, why did
What
I make that mistake?
happens? What happens to the
I got it wrong.
Democrats? I mean,
Well,
they're on their
they're
knees. Do they come back in the
yeah.
midterms?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they do because they always do. What happens is the people are like, "Whoa, I didn't really sign up for all of this," and I want to remind people the lead in the House of Representatives is one vote. So Speaker Mike Johnson has one more
That's a very,
Republican.
very good
Okay,
reminder. I
so
hadn't realized it was that narrow.
right. So just understand, God forbid, and I don't wish this on anybody. Let's say a Republican leaves, or a Republican gets sick, and there's a runoff election. He could lose the majority even before the congressional term is out. So it's a very, very narrow situation. Now they've got three. It's 53-47 in the Senate. That's a pretty strong place to be for somebody like Donald Trump. But remember this, okay? He is a wasting asset. As you and I are speaking, the days are now ticking off, okay? And he has 1,331 days to be the American president. And then Donald Trump is in the rearview mirror of America. And I want you to just think about that for a second. If he goes into the rearview mirror of America, if he doesn't run again like Steve Bannon is suggesting, which means that we have to end the Constitution, which I'm going to predict that that's not going to happen. Maybe I'll get that wrong too.
I'll,
But,
I'll have a
but
T-shirt made for you, Mooch.
yeah. But I mean, let me just say this to you. He's got 121 Scaramucci's, which are 11-day units of time. Like you could say Liz
Yeah,
Truss lasted 4.1 Scaramucci's, right?
yeah.
So he's got 121 of those 11-day units to be president. And let me tell you about politicians. The minute he gets to about halfway through that, he's in the rearview mirror of these guys. And so he's got 18, whatever policy that Trump wants to put into place, he's got about 18 months to effect it. And after that, they're going to dust him. They dusted him with Matt Gaetz. They say, hey, man, that's not happening. Okay, then they probably won't dust him with Pete Hegseth. Pete has been very disciplined in terms of lobbying those senators. And Trump has stayed supportive of Pete Hegseth. And so maybe he'll get through. I don't know. I mean, I like Pete as a person. He's got something else going on. I'll just share this quickly because I know we have to go. There's a gentleman by the name of Steve Feinberg that I'm very close to who has been announced to be the Deputy Defense Secretary. Now, he's an operator. He would be like a chief operating officer. If you said to me, Hegseth is going to be the front man, help on recruiting, help restore the morale in the military, and Steve is going to more or less run the operational features of the Pentagon, it's not really that bad of an outcome for the American people, given who I know Steve Feinberg is. So there's a collection of these things that are happening contemporaneously, but I'm hopeful. We didn't talk about Bitcoin yet. I probably owe Trump a gift for my Bitcoin position.
Yeah, I did
Not
well
that.
out of Bitcoin after Trump. I was quite pleased about that. But listen, it's 0.27 Scaramucci's till Christmas.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah.
show.
Well, Merry Christmas to you and your family.